World's finest are back together. Adam Mares, Matt Moore, back together again. We will recap kind of the Nuggets offseason. We'll take a look at this big question of how good are the Nuggets going to be in 2023-24. Plus, we're going to start a little battle tournament here. Peyton Watson versus Zeke Nnaji. All that and more on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day, part of your week, part of your lives. We appreciate you guys, especially you everydayers that check us out and make us your first listen every day. We are available on all platforms. If you want to check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts, please. Best way to support the show is to check us out on YouTube. You can catch a live version of the show and check out folks like Snowden Stiver, who says, Adam and Matt together, that's my Barbenheimer. Matt's Barbie and Adam is Oppenheimer. Fair.
Actually,
fair.
Look at even the color-wise. Look at us.
Yeah, it does. It does. We are very much in a Barbenheimer meme right now. And you can check that out over on YouTube. We are daily, though next week we will go to 3 days a week for the duration of the dead zone in the NBA schedule season. And of course, picking back up as soon as we get closer to the season. We appreciate you guys making us part of your day, part of your lives. On today's show, we're going to talk about, with Adam and I back together, we want to do like a big picture, like, okay, how good are the Nuggets going to be? We'll do that for 2 segments. Then in the last segment, Adam had a really good idea of kind of a Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. If you got to pick one between various players in the rotation, we're going to start today with Peyton Watson versus Zeke Nnaji. We'll debate the merits of both if there's only room for one in the rotation. We'll do that and more on today's show. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, back from Breckenridge, Maroon Bells here in beautiful Colorado. His name is Adam Mares. Thanks to Adam for helping me out this week and filling in with all the great guests and all the great shows. Appreciate you, Adam. And yeah, we're back. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. I'm deep into the off season.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around. Like, I'm spending a lot of my time on football. Like, that's what I'm doing right now. Is like I'm studying up on, like, I'm reading magazines and going through like making bets on NFL futures and stuff like that. So it's that's where I'm at in the process, as well as like I'll take like about 2 hours a day and do film work. I'm working on the Spurs right now, and oh boy, is that tough watch. It's a tough watch to just sit there and do clips of the Spurs. But we're going through it. All right, let's start here, Adam. All right, there are these various waypoints throughout the season, and it goes even through the regular season, but the offseason in particular, before the draft, after free agency. And then now is this zone. We're through all of the news. We're through all of the burblings. The league has mostly settled. We still have 2 large trades to kind of figure out, but to be quite honest with you, I don't consider them to be like game changers. Like, I'm not like, when Damian Lillard goes to Miami, I'm not going to be like, well, that's it. That's a wrap for 2024. The Heat are winning the title. And I'm not going to be like, oh man, the Clippers got Harden. That's just not where I'm at. And so largely, I think we have a general structure of the league kind of finished. And so what's interesting about the question of how good will the Nuggets be this season? It's not only a question of the internal stuff of managing, and I've talked a lot about motivation and injuries and all this. It's also about like, what is the topography, if you will, of the league look like? Like, who's going to be higher, who's going to be lower, who's going to be more motivated, these types of approaches. I'll ask you this question. This is a feeling question. How do you feel about the Nuggets in this dead zone going into the schedule release here in 2 weeks? How do you feel about where the Nuggets stand in their chances of repeating as NBA champions?
I feel really good. When I said earlier I'm in full off-season mode, part of what I think I mean by that is I'm at the point where I am sort of more optimistic. Like, you get further away from, the tensions, and you almost get more unrealistic in some ways, because it's like, what is it? Before season begins, hope springs eternal for every fan base, right? Everybody is optimistic. I think I'm at a point right now where I'm not sure what the Nuggets are going to be in the playoffs, so I'll almost cut that off. I'll only talk about the regular season. And I just look at it and I think the Nuggets are poised to be as good or better, and possibly even meaningfully better as a regular season team than they were last year. So you look at it, some of that is just to do with like the personnel that they'll be bringing in. A lot of that has to do with Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. were not great for the first 20 games. I think they will be in this next year, and that means that their ceiling is higher. And then lastly, teams that get a win that have staying power, they have a confidence boost that comes from winning. And I think the Nuggets are going to get that. So for me, at this very moment, I'm feeling very good about the regular season Denver Nuggets.
I spent a little bit of time on vacation thinking about how I need to not overreact to the things that I tend. If I find a worrying concept, and this is with any team that I do analysis on, I tend to hone in on that, and it's like a virus where it infects the rest of the team.
What is that for the Nuggets?
The bench. It's the inexperience on the bench. And
but do you think about it this way, that the bench was as bad as it could be, or do you look at it and think that no, it could get way worse?
Yeah, I talked about that on the last show that I did. Was basically like, well, look, the bar is not only 0, it's negative. Like the bar is like a -5. So if it's that bad, it can't really be worse. If it is, then yeah, you've got a problem. But if it was that bad, if it was so bad as to be worse than last year's group, and it's really funny that I say bench because that's what we're used to talking about, and it's really just like non-Jokic.
Non-Jokic,
right?
yeah.
But it was so bad that it's like, okay, if it were to be worse than that, it would require like meaningful and immediate intervention.
Yeah.
It would be like, oh, we had to make a deal because it was like we were losing by 20 points per 100 possessions, like, or even worse than that. Like we were losing by 20 points per 12 minutes without Jokic in each half or whatever. And so you wind up in this kind of thing where it can't really be worse. So I tend to agree. And I think that with Denver, I did talk about this though. It's not really the bench. For me, it's actually more of, if there are injuries, if guys are less available and the supporting cast is less capable of filling in the Jokic minutes. And so now you still have a low, ceiling on the bench and the starters are a little bit worse. What does that look like? But then I also kind of remember just like, look, man, those 5 guys are killers and they're all healthy and in their primes. Like, there's just not a weak spot in the starting 5. And there's not even a weak spot in terms of he's getting up there. Like the Bucks, I have a lot of questions about. Like I'm very low on the Bucks and I'm actively fading them because I'm like, guys, that's 33, 34, 35. And then Giannis, who's got a lot of miles on him. So I kind of agree with you. And the stuff you talked about when they get a win, I started talking about that on the other show, that there is a possibility that I am completely off in my assessment that they're going to be slightly worse this season. And they might be just no, they might just be untouchable next season because it is such it's light work for them because of what they've learned in that playoff run.
I do think light work requires your bench to be good because I don't think you can play the starters play 4 stints, right? I don't think you can expect them to press pedal to the metal for all 4 stints. It just gets annoying. It gets exhausting. So you do need a bench that can be close to a net 0 most of the time in their limited minutes. So that's where, to me, does the season get easier is still a little bit of a mystery. But your point to me is the good one, because Bruce Brown, to me, I think, this is going to sound like a hot take, had no impact on the Denver Nuggets' bench. He had a major impact on the staggered lineups. And to your point, somebody's out, plug Bruce in, and you're perfect. Murray's out, Bruce plays point. KCP's out, Bruce plays shooting guard. Michael Porter's out, Bruce, we go 3 guards, and you got that. That's where his real value was, and I don't know that the Nuggets have that guy now. I do think that Christian Brown can be an interesting piece as a replacement for a KCP or something, or even a Michael Porter. But it's not like how Bruce was able to just play whatever role Denver needed if there was an injury. So I think they lost that. But it is the part where Denver's win-loss total seems to sink or swim is just about, do you have a bench that wins their minutes some nights? Because last year, the amount of times Denver's bench won their minutes, you could probably count just on your fingers. So that's where I look at and I go, if I'm trying to be optimistic, and at this moment I'm feeling somewhat optimistic, the foundation of your bench at the moment appears to be Reggie Jackson, tough start, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Zeke Nnaji. That to me is a very good defensive lineup, which automatically raises the floor of what your bench can be. They might not score, especially in the half court, but I do think that they can get stops, which is how you avoid some of these 10-0 runs that Denver seemed to have so many of last year.
This is a really good point I want to talk about on the other side, which is Joe Broussard says the bench will be hungry. And you kind of touched on it there. And I think there's something really interesting we should dive into. Let's talk about that on the other side with I've talked a lot about motivation with the starters. I want to talk about the bench motivation and how that could help things. We'll do that on the other side. But first, I need to tell you about PrizePicks, which is daily fantasy made easy. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, and you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people with screens of projections. It's just you versus PrizePicks projections. They offer projections on any sport that you watch: NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, men's college basketball and women's college basketball, WNBA, esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, Euro basketball. Got that coming up. Cricket and more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's just that easy. They offer safe and fast withdrawals and currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us. Let's go ahead and dive back into this comment from Joe Broussard, which is the bench will be hungry. I think it's like an interesting kind of thing that to kind of like work through here as far as I've talked about the motivation of the starters. Right. And one of the things I was talking about this with my wife on the trip. My wife really wants to come on the show, by the way. She has hot takes that she wants to.
Oh, I can't wait. This is going to be an all-timer.
Yeah, it's going to be bad.
Man, let's do this.
And so she's very sad about Bruce Brown. She's more sad about the Avalanche, but she's very sad about Bruce Brown.
Oh, I can't wait for this episode.
But I was telling her, I was like, one of the advantages the Nuggets had last year was that everybody was paid. They didn't have to worry about agendas because they extended KCP and Aaron was on contract and MPJ got his deal and Jamal and Nikola were on the maxes. Like Bruce, I thought was in a good spot because like he was playing for free agency, but he also understood what he needed to do to get paid, which obviously worked out pretty well for him. And so there wasn't really anybody that was like really working to get their next deal. Like Jeff was at the end of his career, whatever was the best deal available, he would go to. So what's interesting this year, though, is you do have guys that I think are now working towards something. Like Reggie's on this 2-year deal, but even then, like Reggie's still kind of hanging on here in terms of having a major placement in a rotation, right? You got moved by the Clippers, they were thought to be the team that had kind of salvaged him after various flameouts. Then you have Christian had a really good first season, obviously helped them win a championship. If Christian can show that he can do more, then his ceiling for career earnings goes considerably up. And then you've got like, I think Zeke is one in particular that like I was thinking back to all the different things that we've talked about with him and how much it's been all over the board. Like trying to figure out if you had asked me, what will Zeke Nnaji be making in 2026? Right. If you had asked me that a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago on this very date, my numbers would have been radically different every single time. And so there's an opportunity here for Zeke to actually earn quite a bit of money if he can establish himself as both a rotation and impact player on this team. I don't really know how to I want to ask you this. Where does Vlatko fit into this?
Every year we do this one, right? He should play more minutes and he doesn't. I think this is the first year I go the opposite direction where I just don't know that he's part of the team's plans. I mean, if they were to go to a 10-man rotation, maybe. But unless Zeke has a disastrous season, I don't see where Vlatko fits into things. Are they going to go with both him and Zeke? I mean, they did for portions last year. And by the way, man, it was the best bench lineup they had all season in the regular season. That was the best when those two guys played. Right. But I have a sneaky suspicion that Reggie Jackson's going to play. Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, I think are locks to play. You probably have one starter staggering with the bench, and that leaves one spot. So for me, I don't think Vlatko plays consistent minutes. But he'll get a shot just like every year. He'll have opportunities where he steps in and fills a role, and I just think it'll be one of him or Zeke.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, given that I think that there's a lot of sentiment around the fan base that the answer is going to be like the Vleek, as I've named it, lineup, the Vlecko Zeke lineup. And
if the Jamal Murray is your stagger, it could make sense. There is a rotation where Murray is your bench. Like Reggie doesn't play, Pickett doesn't play. You just have one. Christian Brown replaces Jamal Murray, and he plays with the starters with no point guard, like which Denver maybe has success with. Aaron Gordon does a little bit more ball handling. And then your bench is Murray with one of KCP or Christian Brown. They end up splitting minutes with the bench. Peyton Watson, and then Zach Vleek and Zach Vleek.
Vleek.
You got it. It's in the lexicon now. Yep. Those two. And so that is a potential rotation. It just means not playing a backup point guard, which I'm a little skeptical of Malone to do.
Yeah. I don't necessarily think that the front office would want that either. I don't think the front office is just like, we don't want ball handlers. I guess I'll ask you, because I think you know better. Do you think that the front office is more confident in not having a ball handler?
No. I just think it's hard to get through a regular season. I think in a playoffs you could do that, but I just don't think you can get through a regular season with that much on Jokic's shoulders. So
I think that's one of the things that I think is kind of interesting here. Now, both those players, so Vlecko, there's a team option for 2024-25. So he could be in the last, we'll see if the team picks up the option or not. He's playing for them to pick up the option, essentially, because he doesn't have control over it. And then, Zeke hits RFA next year. And so the idea of extension talks and all those types of things, I think will be interesting. Can Zeke play his way into that? For me, a lot of this, the way that I think about Zeke is less about his play. And for me, I'm just like, he's going to have to show me that he can go 2 months in the rotation with no injuries before I can kind of be like, okay, we can evaluate him and decide ups and downs and ceilings and floors and all of that. Because until you're able to do that, you're just this unknown quantity. You're just like, yeah, when he's healthy, he never is healthy. And I think it's especially worrisome when you're playing so few minutes and you have this injury history. He's not logging 25, 28 minutes in these games.
Yeah, but that might actually be the reason, though, man. It might less be about, because I think what you're implying here is he hasn't played that many minutes, and he broke down. If he played more minutes, he'd break down even more. There might be something too. One of the hardest things to do is to not play and then play a bunch of minutes.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Guys have talked about that too. I think that's definitely fair.
You talked real quick though. You talked about nobody having Denver hasn't had to go through the contract year, this or that, and you're right about that. I think it is an underrated part of this era of Nuggets basketball. Only Michael Malone has sort of gone through that. I think this year though, Zeke Nnaji is the one guy who's in a weird spot because this is his pay year, and he hasn't played a ton of minutes. And if I were him, I would have already been more disgruntled than he has been so far in his NBA career about the opportunity he has or has not gotten. And this year, if his minutes do get yanked around to where he's just getting DNPs, a couple games in a row, if I were his agent, I would be making phone calls. So that is one thing that is textures the Zeke Nnaji story this year. And
it should be noted that KCP is technically in a contract year. He's got a player option for next season. So KCP is also, I think, a guy that's probably going to, I will say the guys in KCP spot, what they tend to do, if you look at Chris Middleton last year, talk about this. Chris was careful with the regular season, right? Coming off an injury, tried to come back. It didn't really work. And he shut it down again. And then he came back and they absolutely slayed the last 3 months of the season.
He also had some personal life turmoil, lost his father and different things. So
had some stuff going on. So I think that there's different ways that KCP can kind of approach this, but I do think it's kind of an interesting question that we stumbled onto as far as everybody was so aligned last year. And I think they could probably use a little bit of fire and tension and motivation from various outside entities, especially with, I think, because this I think will be the challenge for the starters is that when they're motivated and in sync, they're so good. They're so dominant. But it also makes it, I think, it pretty easy for them not to kind of give what they're going to have to. And I've talked about that before. I think there's just gonna be a lot of nights where they're not certain. To kind of wrap this up, I want to ask you this question. If I gave you an over under of 3.5 for their seeding in the Western Conference,
Are you kidding me?
I take it this is an under for you.
Well, yeah, under meaning it'll be 1 or I mean, look, you could have said the line is 0.5 to me. I just look around and I say the Phoenix Suns to me are a team that contend. I don't know who else is going to be a high volume winner. I think Denver will. And it's not because I think they're going to come out gangbusters. I just think they're very talented and they're going to be very, very good. They have a lot of different ways that can beat you. Their chemistry is already set, especially with their second lineup. To me, I'm surprised you set the line at 3.5.
So one of the reasons I think I set the line at 3.5 is it has to do with more of when I look at the historical context. 53 for a 1 seed is not a lot, right? And there are reasons, and you can definitely, like you've mentioned them, how the Nuggets played in the first 2 months of the season and how they played in the back 2. My question is like, I don't think it's going to be the same pattern. Right. I don't think they're going to be like, I don't think that in November, you and I are going to have are the Nuggets in trouble conversation like we had, which I still love that we had that conversation. And I don't think that they'll necessarily tail off the way that they did in March, because like they went they lost to the Spurs.
Nobody was pushing them is the point. Like there was nobody to push them. And this year there might be, but do you think there's a 60-win team this year?
God, that's a good question. I do not look at in the West. I do not look at anybody and go like, oh yeah, they're going to win at least 58, 57.
And I kind of wonder, Matt, if I don't want to say we're done with 60-win teams,
but in that era.
Yeah, but I do think that the super team era of the 2010s might be less frequent than it is now. I mean, we kind of have one in Phoenix a little bit, but just the way the NBA has slowly adjusted to try to make it a question of whether you should or should not build a super team. And I think a lot of teams are like, I don't know, let's get 2 stars and some role supporting cast. And that might raise your ceiling as a playoff team, but I just don't know that we're going to get another 67, 73 win dynasty team. I think that Denver winning 53 wins last year feels low, and it was, but I think 57, 58 wins is going to be the 1 seed in both conferences this year.
Interesting. Okay. It's that's entirely possible. That's entirely, I think, on the board. I do think
if you go through real quick, just think about it this way, Matt. Go through the Western Conference. Rockets, Spurs. Is there another team that we could say maybe Portland and Utah? And Utah is even a little more questionable. Portland maybe even a little more questionable depending on what they do. But those 4 teams to me look like they're a tier below everyone else. But then you go to Oklahoma City, New Orleans, Minnesota, the teams that are typically outside the play-in, right. You think of them, those are good teams. They're going to beat the best teams in the NBA some nights. And I just look at that and go, that's why I don't think there's going to be 60-win teams. Is the 10th best team in the Western Conference is a pretty good team. That's
really interesting because the way that you're kind of framing this is because there's a double-edged sword there, right? Which is like, hey, all those teams are going to be better. Yeah, but they're also going to be better against Denver. But like what's interesting is the way that you're kind of framing it is, it's not that Denver is going to be a juggernaut. It's that in a high, like Denver is well suited to come out on top of a high level of a high parity conference.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I'm gonna have to think on that because I think that's like a really good way of framing Denver's potential there.
I mean, I'm going through and looking at who makes the playoffs. Like it's too early to be doing this, right? Like we're all change our opinions, but when you go through it, it's an extremely difficult exercise. Where do the Lakers fit in the West? I can't figure out if they're like a 5th best team or the 12th best team. Yeah. And I think it's realistic for either one because, again, Oklahoma City, Minnesota, these teams are good. Dallas didn't make the playoffs last year, Matt. Are we going to count them out 2 years in a row?
Yeah, the play-in tournament may be absolutely ridiculous this season. Like it may be absolutely the race for the to stay out of the play-in tournament, especially, could get brutal. So a reason for Denver to load up early.
Rob says hard to see the Suns as a super team after watching what the Nuggets did to them last year. Agree about the playoffs, but they were a super team in the regular season before they added Bradley Beal. Remember when Durant, the short sample size, they won a lot of games. I think the Suns are going to be an elite regular season team. I'm skeptical of them in the playoffs, but regular season wins are different.
On the other side, we're going to start a series, and I got to figure out a name for this thing, but we're going to battle it out over who gets to be in the rotation and which one you would pick right now if you had to choose, at least for a minute allotment between the two. And we're going to start with Peyton Watson versus Zeke Nnaji. We'll do that on the other side. First, I tell you about FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting everything from the money line, the over-under, to who you think is going to have the first home run. I'm putting in some bets. I'm fading the Bears. I like the Cowboys. I will tell you, this is probably the first time that I think I'm not taking a Broncos under, and the first time in like 5 years. I'm a little concerned with how good this team could be, especially with the upgrades at offensive tackle. You can get in on that and maybe even take a long shot bet for them to win the division if you want over at FanDuel. All-on app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. This is such a good show. You and I were like, what the hell are we going to talk about? And like, this has been a great show. I've gotten things that have my brain turning from these conversations. Thanks for making us part of your day, everybody. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple. Just take a second and go ahead and go to the review page and drop us a 5-star review. If you're listening to us on YouTube, as a lot of folks do, we have made like the number of subscribers, and I've been really impressed, Adam. Not only have we made huge strides during obviously the championship run, even after, like, the word is out about Locked On Nuggets and all the great Nuggets content around. All right. So Adam had this idea, and I think it's a good one. And I want to like make sure that we frame it the way that you want to. How do you want to frame the battle that we're going to be having, the Street Fighter duel that we're having between two rotation guys? Give me the lowdown. What you think?
I mean, it's kind of just like it's just an either or, right? Like you got to pick a side, and we'll try to pit some guys who are sort of in the same zone in the pecking order, and just say which one's going to end up coming out.
Okay. So we're going to start with Peyton Watson versus Zeke Nnaji.
First of all, let me ask this. Do you feel like those guys, if you were handicapping top 8 in a playoffs right now, top 5 are set, Christian Brown is set at 6.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handicap? Would these guys be 7 and 8 in the handicapping?
Reggie Jackson right now is a minus number to be in the rotation.
He is for regular season. I'm saying playoffs, though.
I think he still is, just because like Bruce took up a big chunk of those part of it is in the non-Jokic minutes. So Nikola plays 40 minutes in the average playoff, 42, right? So you still got to get through 6 minutes, right? Who is handling ball handler duties in those minutes? And even you can't not have Jamal, Jamal's going to have to play a lot with Nikola. Are you really going to go 6 minutes in each half without Jamal and Nikola on the floor together, right? So some of that all kind of works out. I still and I guess here's my thing. I'm going to give Reggie a minus number just because he currently is on roster, but my answer would be like a minus number for Reggie Jackson / a backup point guard they acquired midseason.
But this is why I don't think his odds are there, because I think there's 3 options. Reggie Jackson is the guy, or 4 options. They don't play a point guard in the playoff, a second point guard. They play Reggie, they play Pickett, or they play some other point guard who's not yet on the roster who they acquire for the playoff.
And the other 3 of those beyond they play Reggie are probably a much higher percentage than they play Reggie. I would agree with that. So
that's why I think he's below. Whereas Peyton Watson, I think is pretty likely. I mean, they're going to give him a go. They want him to play. And Zeke Nnaji, I kind of just pencil in there as a guy that probably is going to get every opportunity this year to become a playoff player.
All right. So Zeke Nnaji is 22, Zeke Nnaji is 22 and 200 days. So he's about to be free. I always love
this is age 23 season.
Yeah. I always love the number of days on Basketball Reference. I'm a big fan of that. Peyton Watson, on the other hand, how old is Peyton?
20, I think.
He's about to be 21. He's 320 days old. So he's about to be 21. So it's 23 versus a 21-year-old. Zeke they both bring defensive versatility. They both can guard multiple positions. I don't think Peyton can guard up as much as Zeke does, right? Like you could theoretically, you can't throw Zeke out versus Embiid or even like Vucevic, but you could throw out Zeke versus
most backup bigs, like say Thomas Bryant.
Yeah.
I think you could play him. Thomas Bryant's big and he scores a lot, but I still think you can do things there. So
yeah. Versus Peyton can probably guard once a little bit easier. Although I think that one of Zeke's real versatilities is his ability to switch on to point guards and contain.
Just so people clear, because I see the chat confused. They don't play the same position. This isn't about only one gets the spot. This is more both are going to get an opportunity at different roles. Which one is more likely to stay there?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be both.
Yeah. And of the two, it's interesting because like my mind immediately goes to the fact that Peyton is Calvin's guy. So I always think that he's more likely to stick, right? But I will say, I think I kind of lean towards Zeke. The videos of him shot looks better, which is good. I will kind of say this, that after you mess with a shot, Brandon Clark had this where he looked really good initially. They completely messed up his shot. And then last year, Clark started to kind of like rebound a little bit and started to shoot a little bit better. It was like more time with the new form that you saw the effects start to carry over. So maybe this is a season where Zeke's jumper looks a little bit better, even if it doesn't look as good as it did in his rookie season. I feel like I still have a lot of questions, especially coming out of Summer League. I know that Peyton put up numbers, but I have just a lot of concern about how out of control Peyton can seem at times. And on this team in particular, I think it's hard for you to stay in the rotation when you play out of control, because the Nuggets play a very controlled style. Even if it's like it's high energy in terms of the ball movement, it functions because everyone knows how to play. And Peyton, there are still long stretches where I feel like I've called it baby lamb syndrome, where these guys just look like they're trying to find their legs or wobbling a little bit. And I'm concerned about that. That's my first thought on it.
Well, first of all, I like the point. First of all, I think that both guys are going to get a lot of opportunity. I just think that if Zeke plays bad in October, he's not getting benched. I think the Nuggets are going to say, we got to survive this. And the same goes for Peyton Watson. I think Peyton Watson might get yanked around a little bit more because he's younger, and Malone has just done this to everyone. Like, oh, you missed this rotation, you're benched. Not because I don't believe in you, but just as like almost a disciplinary thing, right? Like, hey, we don't live with this. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're more frustrated with Peyton Watson's in and out of the rotation than we are of Zeke's this year. But I think both guys are going to be like, we need them to be good by April. So we're going to give them a lot of opportunity to be there. Your point, though, about, well, Peyton, to me, brings something that bench likely needs, which is just a little bit more, he's more dynamic. Like, if you ask me, what is Zeke offensively? I think Zeke's going to be a great defender. You know, he can switch, he can do all those things, and it unlocks a unit. But Denver's bench is going to have a hard time scoring. And I think Peyton Watson as a transition scorer is extremely valuable. And I think that there is a chance Peyton Watson evolves over the course of the season into a player that has something in the offense that is a go-to. Like, okay, we run that out of a timeout, bench needs something, we run something for Peyton. I'd be shocked if they ran something for Zeke. Like, I just don't think they're going to come out of a timeout and say we're going to Zeke. With Peyton, I could at least see it. And so I think I lean towards Peyton. And then your point is the most important one. What are the Nuggets most motivated to make work? Clearly Peyton Watson, in my opinion.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. If I told you that Zeke Nnaji made his biggest stride this season was in screening, would that change things for you? Because it would for me. Because if he can screen more effectively, then you can actually run, I don't know, sets with a second unit, which would be a huge step up for them. Like, a lot of what happened with those second units was just like, it's really funny.
DeAndre screens well.
Yeah, that's true. DeAndre does screen well.
And he was the worst option in terms of the big.
Yeah. That's true. I guess this is an interesting eye test versus stats one, right? Because I like the fact that DeAndre could peel for Jamal and get him a little space, could peel for Bruce and get him a little bit of space. The overall numbers were terrible. And like that, I don't know where to directly relate. I'd have to go back and look at specifically offensive, defensive, and like who shot what in all those lineups. Not to excuse DeAndre, because like can't play. Like, he's there as like the veteran. Like, he just can't play. The numbers are what they are. But I will say that I think that I kind of go back to Boston. One of the reasons I've upgraded Boston as much as I have with the Kristaps Porzingis addition is because even though they didn't add the ball handler that I think they still need, it does give them the ability to be like, hey, we're just going to run some pick and roll. We're just going to run, we're going to run Tatum and Porzingis pick and roll.
Pick and pop, yeah.
And like, that's a base action that you can just get to when things are not clicking and not working. You need those types of things to make it work. Like for the Nuggets, I think a lot of it is honestly, it's not even Jokic post-ups, it's handoffs. Like that action has always been such bread and butter for the Nuggets going back to when Nikola first came in. And teams have learned how to defend it better. But you saw, that's one thing I was kind of thinking about this when I was watching some clips of the finals run, was that there was a lot of sequences where I was like, man, they would have guarded this handoff action entirely differently like 4 years ago, because that was such a bigger part of how they use Nikola. And then now that Nikola has become the Omega and you have to guard, you're so worried about the post ups and the face ups and, you know, the off the dribble action and the off script. There's so many ways to use them that they can actually go back to handoff action sometimes and generate really good looks. And so that I kind of wonder is if Zeke, I don't think Zeke can ever be a handoff option because of his size.
No, I don't even think it's that. I think it's more like that. That requires kind of a more elite feel for the game that I just don't think he'll have.
But if he can just screen and pop, if he can just be like, we're just going to spam pick and pop on your backup drop big, then that provides you with a little bit more. Versus with you, when you were like, we're going to run something out of the timeout to get Peyton Watson. I'm like, well, I don't know what that is. Like, what do you?
Well, no. I just think it like put the ball in his hands and let him run a pick and roll or something of that nature. Like. He's so raw at it, Matt, but I do think he has a foundation to become good at it. And that's what I mean.
One of the things that's really interesting about him, about Peyton, is that you're right. There are all these sequences where it's like he looks completely out of control, but then there's like the rare sequence where you're like, oh, that looked really clean and good. Like,
I don't even know if it's that rare. It's just more like 50-50, which, you know, like it's weird because usually players are much higher percentage than that.
Yeah, it's either you can or you cannot do this. And it's like, well, he can. Does he do it often? No. Does he do it rarely? No, he does it more than that. It's just
if a guy swishes half his shots and hits the side of the backboard on half, you like aren't convinced he's a good shooter, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same with Peyton's ball handling, where it's like, okay, it's hard for me to really fully go all in on it just yet.
Dayon is right in this. Peyton Watson is much more active, aggressive overall. That probably, I think, does play a part here, where I think that Zeke's tendency to float for long stretches of the game will cost him with this coaching staff, especially because I'm expecting another very frustrated and high tension year from Malone, given what given what the bench looks like. I just think he's going to be so frustrated
right back into it.
And he's not going to be able to like turn up the heat the way that he did periodically this year to get the starters. The starters are going to be like, it's January, chill out. Like there's going to be a lot of that. So
the identity of the bench unit to me is going to be defense first and foremost. Christian Braun, Peyton Watson, Zeke, Nnaji is a great defensive trio that has upside to be a stopping unit, meaning other teams, even if they're a better, more talented team, they get frustrated by how much Denver stops. I think they are a transition team. Peyton Watson's an elite transition player. Christian Braun's athletic. He can get down the open court. And then I think when it does get bogged down to the half court, they're a Reggie Jackson team, which is not my favorite, but I think that is kind of where you go with this. And all those guys, I don't know where either one of them necessarily fit into that equation. For Zeke, if he can become a Porzingis or Maxi Kleber-esque pick and pop type player, it does give him a role in that half court offense, as opposed to just standing in the quarter. With Peyton Watson, I don't know just yet. I don't know his game well enough to be able to say I know where he would fit into every type of configuration and every type of identity.
It's funny that we've spent a lot of the summer talking about Reggie because you have to, because he's the only guy they really gave money to, and he's the veteran, right? And I just continue to be like, I have a feeling that we're just going to be like, hey, remember when we spent like 2 months talking about Reggie Jackson? That was funny.
And then he's not playing or something?
Yeah, and he's not playing or he's been traded. So,
yeah, I said this the other day, but after Summer League, I'm a little bit less optimistic about Pickett overtaking Reggie. Like, I still love his game. I just think the runway for him would probably have to be I don't know. I'm curious. I love his game. I absolutely love it. He is small. And so and defensively, I thought it stood out more than offensively.
Yeah.
There are parts of his game that I think he's going to have to really work on at the NBA level. And I'm worried he's not going to be a guy that gets a long runway for that. So I think Reggie, I actually do think Reggie's going to play.
All right, let's go wrap it up for Locked On Nuggets for a Friday. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and being with us. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Drop us those likes and subscribes on the old YouTube. You can follow Adam Maras on Twitter at Adam_Maras. I'm an HP basketball. We'll be back on Monday. We'll probably do live show on Sunday night. That's typically what we do is we'll do live show late Sunday night for Monday, and then we'll be into our off-season rotation next week. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have yourselves a great weekend. We'll see you guys again next time on Locked On Nuggets.